On today's show, is Chris Kreider or Jonathan Marchessault an upgrade the Capitals are looking for?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, it is a Caps Fan Friday. And in today's episode, a summer tradition I have on this show, I have a Capitals fan that'll join me in segment number 3 and give me his thoughts on the state of the Capitals. A bit later, I'll talk about Jonathan Marchessault. Too much term or just enough spark? You take a look at Jonathan Marchessault. He played on the first line right wing for the Predators this past season, or at least the tail end of the season. Would he be a good mix on, say, the first or second line for the Capitals? I'll talk about that. But just to get it going here, I'll talk about Chris Kreider, a guy that I think had a down season for a multitude of reasons. But one of the things is injury. And another thing was just playing on a really poor Rangers team at the end of the season. He was playing third line left wing. But ultimately, I think that there is much more in the tank. I think that he has to offer. But the common thing between Kreider and Marchessault is they both are under contract. So it would require a trade and, some potential salary retention, I guess, would be great, especially in the Marchessault case. But we'll dive into Chris Kreider and if I think he would be a good fit on the Capitals. Let's first of all take a look at the back of his hockey card. Again, this past season, he dealt with some injury, 68 games, 22 goals. But you rewind time here just a few years in the 21-22 season, put up 52 goals in 81 games. That was the high water mark of his career. All things considered, routinely put up 39, 36, 52, 20 goals, double-digit goals. Would he be a good fit for the Capitals? And, a lot of money to spend on a guy that was playing on the third line left wing for the Rangers. Now, I understand that a lot of things can change. It is all based on the players that you have on your team, where they're going to ultimately slot in. That is where he fit in for whatever reason for the Rangers. But there's the potential that he could slot up, if he played with the Capitals. So let's dive into the latest with Chris Kreider and what I think the talk is on him here. The longtime Ranger and one of the most recognizable net front presences in the league, Kreider is coming off a rough season, like I said. 68 games played, 22 goals, only 30 points. And one of the things I spoke of is I don't think it is a good idea to judge last season too much on what kind of player he is. You take a look at the Rangers, a team that underperformed, and now with Coach Sullivan there this next year, I think you're going to get a lot more out of these players and whatever kind of roster changes might be in store for that team. But it wasn't just a down season. He dealt with a mangled hand, vertigo, and a flurry of trade speculation after his name popped up in league-wide reports. The Rangers, they are not afraid of making big changes, as you saw that happen in the latter part of the season. Quite a fall from grace. We remember the season before, the Capitals faced the Rangers in the playoffs. President's Trophy winners riding high. Talk about a riches to rags story for a premier NHL team. But you take a look at him, 34 years old, so still potentially has some fuel left in the tank. But the money part is where it gets a little tough for me. He is 34, like I said, 2 years left on his deal at a $6.5 million cap hit. And yes, he has a 15-team no trade list. But it's believed that Chris Drury is open to moving him if the right offer comes in. And, as far as Kreider is concerned, I think he would be a good fit for the Capitals, a $6.5 million cap hit. That's not horrible. And one of the things, even if we wanted to go with the narrative that he would be a good third line left wing, again, maybe a bit of a big spend for a third line left wing, but it would definitely help fill the role of, an inconsistent Capitals third line. You put him, say Connor McMichael as the center and, Ryan Leonard on the right wing, not too bad, and that's just kind of how I would have him penciled in right now. Again, there's a lot of things in play. He could potentially play the second line left wing if Connor McMichael was that third line center. A lot of balls in the air, if you will. But the big question is would Kreider make sense for the Capitals? Well, I just laid that out. I think it would make sense if they wanted to take a bite out of that contract that isn't, excessive, but it isn't overly cheap either. For me, though, I think the answer is yes. If the price is right, he could slide into the top six as a winger next to either Strome, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Like I said, that he could also, play on that third line. But a lot of that is up in the air as well. What kind of moves the Capitals could potentially make at the center position. That gives the Capitals a heavy, fast, physical player who thrives in front of the net. Kind of, a prototypical would be a perfect candidate for a Capital, kind of like you saw from Connor McMichael this last season, hanging out net front for those greasy goals, those second, third opportunities, deflections, those kind of things, that I think Chris Kreider would, in fact, be a good option for the Capitals. Exactly the kind of guy who could create chaos on the power play or open space for a younger line mate like Ryan Leonard. And again, a lot of this I have just penciled in because we don't know. Ryan Leonard, I kind of have penciled in, is that third line right wing, but it all depends. Obviously the ceiling on him is high, that he could even shoot higher. But I think that you have Leonard, say you have McMichael at the center, and all of a sudden Kreider on the left wing. Wow, all of a sudden that third line got a lot better in a hurry. And the other thing, he also adds leadership and playoff experience, something that the Capitals sorely need. That we saw the struggles the Capitals faced in the playoffs, more specifically in the second round. I think he could be absolutely huge. Now, if the Caps are willing to get him, you're not giving up a premium pick or one of your blue chip prospects like Crystal or Mirshnyshenko, but maybe a second rounder and a mid-tier prospect like Pierre-Luc Dubois, something of that nature. That's a conversation starter anyway. The Rangers might also need to retain some salary, maybe $1 to $1.5 million to make it work cap-wise. You take a look at it, the Capitals do have some money to spend, but I don't think that they want to spend an exorbitant amount on an ostensible third line left wing. Again, that's where I've him penciled in. He could very well pop up to that second line, but definitely an intriguing name. And I wouldn't be mad about it. I know that he had an off season with the Rangers last season, but kind of like what I talked about, it was a poor Rangers team. Could you imagine how he would perform with the great supporting cast on the Capitals, not to mention the absolute knockout head coach of Spencer Carberry? So definitely something to consider there. The bottom line, though, Kreider isn't the 52 goal scorer we saw in 2022. I get that. I don't think that he's ever going to be that. But even if we can get a bit more like that, say we got a 30 goal scorer, something of that nature. But I still think he has the potential of being like a 25 goal scorer who brings grit, speed, and leadership. Something that to really circle there is that leadership aspect. As we know that Ovechkin and Karlsson ostensibly will be playing their final year with the Capitals. Stranger things have happened, but the Capitals are looking for leadership. And a guy like Chris Kreider could definitely offer that. If the cost is manageable and the Caps want to push for another playoff run, this move makes a lot of sense. Hit me up on Twitter or on YouTube. What are your thoughts? How would you like to see Chris Kreider? Would he be a good fit on the Capitals? Or are you judging his performance based on his previous year with the Rangers? All things considered, of the players I've spoke about this summer, I think it would be worthwhile. I really do. And, you take a look at at his contract, rather. It's expensive, but like I said, it's not exorbitant. And I think that he could definitely help rectify the third line position, the left wing position, but the overall third line in general. All right, so coming up here after the break, another big name and another guy that was a victim of playing on a poor team, Jonathan Marchessault. Would he be a good fit for the Capitals? I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Now, listen, the economy is a bit up and down. We don't know what's going to happen from one day to the other. If you want some assuredness, or say you're trying to plan your financial future with your significant other, turn to Monarch Money. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized how much I was spending on going out to eat and food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2, we're talking about another big name player, and that is Jonathan Marchessault. One of the players that went to the Nashville Predators, and the feeling going into the season that the Nashville Predators were going to be an absolute knockout. Former head coach of the Capitals and now GM of the Nashville Predators, Barry Trotz, was going to make his stamp on that team and make a winning product. Not so much the case, as it has been a bit of a tough go for Barry Trotz as a general manager. And, oftentimes, like I said, sometimes the best laid plans go to waste. Stamkos, all these guys, it seemed like a slam dunk for the Predators to be a true contender, but sometimes not the case. So Jonathan Marchessault might be a guy that wants out of Nashville. The hard part, like I talked about in segment 1 with Chris Kreider, is it would not come cheap. And both of the players that I'm talking about tonight are under current contracts. And Jonathan Marchessault's a bit on the rich side. But like I said, at the end of the season, he played first line right wing with the Preds. How would that look for you? Alex Ovechkin, Dylan Strome, and Jonathan Marchessault on the first line. I like it. And if they could find a way to get it done, first of all, like I did in segment 1, let's take a look at the back of his hockey card, the 24-25 season, and 78 games played, 21 goals. Not great, not horrible, but you take a look at his time with the Vegas Golden Knights, where he played a substantial amount of time, 27 goals, 25 goals, 28 goals. His last season in Sin City put up 42 goals. That was the high watermark of his career. And ultimately, of course, that is who the Nashville Predators thought they were getting. But again, it's always important when you see these players take a dip in production. Is it something that went wrong with their game? Was there an injury? Was there some kind of nagging concern? Or in this case, were they just playing on a truly awful team? I hate to say it. Historically, Nashville has been a great organization. Last year, not so much. So let's pivot. to Nashville, and Jonathan Marchessault, another big name who might be available. Again, not old, not young, 34 years old, coming off a 21-goal, 56-point campaign in a down season. I've talked about that, but has 4 years left at $5.5 million per season. Marchessault was a Conn Smythe winner just 2 seasons ago with Vegas and still has a great shot. Excellent instincts and that playoff edge you want from a veteran winger. I do think that, if they could come to terms with it, Chris Patrick talked about taking a big hack. Jonathan Marchessault, I would be absolutely fine with. I'm not going to think about the money aspect of it for right now. I'm just going to talk about a fit on where I think he could fit into the Capitals lineup. Like I talked about, I could envision Ovechkin, Strome, Jonathan Marchessault. I think that would be great. I could also envision second line, Connor McMichael. We'll just go with that for now. Pierre-Luc Dubois and Jonathan Marchessault. Both really great options. I think you really can't lose there. And I know people will say, well, what's going to happen to Protas or Wilson and all that? I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm just saying that the first 2 lines, the top 6, would be really, really good, I think, with Jonathan Marchessault in the mix. Again, the Capitals already have great options on their top 6 right wing with Tom Wilson, or we've seen Alexei Protas over there as well. But does he fit in DC? That's the question. Unlike Kreider, Marchessault plays more of a finesse game. So not a guy that necessarily hangs out at the net front. Not as physical, but more skilled and better in transition. Something the Capitals struggled with in the playoffs. He could slot into the Capitals' first or second or maybe even third line and give them some much-needed secondary scoring. He'd be an upgrade over Radish or even Beauvillier if he doesn't return. And I just, circle them as we don't know. I would expect Radish is going to be on to the next one. And Beauvillier, listen, if I have the option of Beauvillier or Marchessault, I'm taking Marchessault. He also brings playoff production as the Golden Knights, time flies. They've been around, like I said, it seems like just yesterday they joined the league, but they've been around for a while. But the one thing that he gained playing in Sin City was an organization that routinely made it to the playoffs. And so a guy that is a bit more battle-tested than a lot of the players that are on the current roster. Something you can't have enough of is playoff experienced players. And he's someone who could help insulate the younger core like Connor McMichael or Ivan Miroshnichenko if he makes the team. The big catch, though, here is term. This is where it gets a little bit sticky. They would be taking a big bite out of this apple, much the same way that they did last summer in Pierre-Luc Dubois. The concern is term. 4 years at $5.5 million. That's a lot of term that says it wants to get younger for a team, that wants to get younger. Again, and, that is my thought on it. The team does want to get younger, but, there's 2 sides to every coin. I also think, like I talked about in segment 1, the team is looking for proven players in the playoffs for number 1, and they're also looking for leaders. So like I said, Ovechkin, Carlson step away. We already had Oshie and Backstrom. They're done. So you definitely need some leaders on a team that is going to be getting younger, or at least a team that doesn't have as much leadership. Of course, we know Tom Wilson will be the captain, but it's not just the captain alone that gets it done. But if the Preds are willing to retain some salary or take a contract back, that's a big thing. If Nashville would eat some of this deal, that got a whole lot sweeter. I already like the deal as is, a little rich for my blood, but I think that Marchessault would be a good pickup. Or say, they could send a player out to Nashville, like Trevor Van Riemsdyk or, Pierre-Luc Dubois or one of these guys down in Hershey that has a good upside. Suddenly that deal becomes a lot more palatable. You could also flip a mid-tier prospect and a third rounder to keep the future intact. So you don't necessarily need to blow up a team just to get a premier player. And I still think that Jonathan Marchessault is a premier player. Are there better players? Yes. Are there worse players? Yes. But I think he would be a good upgrade. So is he worth it? That's the biggest question in all of this. In short term, yes. Marchessault is still capable of a 25 to 30 goal season. And we have players like that on this team. It's not like we are desperately needing it. We saw Protas. We saw Wilson. We've seen Nick Michael step up their game, that we have a lot of great goal scorers, but just making it, that much sweeter. That would take this team to the next level. Take a look at the Panthers right now. Take a look at the Oilers right now. Two players that are in the final dance of the season here. Those are the players that have scoring up and down their lineup. Capitals are good. Marchessault could make this team great, but it depends on whether Chris Patrick sees this team as a playoff contender right now or a squad retooling around the youth. I think that, it could go both ways. I could see it going with the latter as well, that, maybe this team is trying to pick up some younger pieces. And I think that's important. I really do. I think it's important to have some young players on your team, but you can't be a team that is youthful, exclusively. See Buffalo Sabres, for example, where it's, a very young laden team. We've seen that from the Senators, still a pretty young team as well. So I think that the Capitals, especially since they are moving on from some pillars that have been here for a long time, that if you could bring in a Chris Kreider, if you could bring in a Jonathan Marchessault, and do it without, depleting the farm or, just, burying them in the cap, where they don't have enough money to bring back a McMichael or a Faravari, then I'm all about it. So those are two really intriguing names. I'm going through big names that ostensibly could take this team to the next level. Circle those two players, Kreider, Marchessault. I think the Capitals could get a whole lot better with either of those players. All right, so coming up here after the break, it is a Caps Fan Friday. The summer is the perfect time to hear from the Capitals fans, what their thoughts are on the team. Alex Ovechkin, kind of looking into your crystal ball. If you would like to be on the next edition of Caps Fan Friday, hit me up, minutecastmedia@gmail.com. That is minutecastmedia.com, or excuse me, minutecastmedia@gmail.com. Hop on for a 10-minute segment. I sure would love to talk to you. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will do that. Caps Fan Friday, straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals on YouTube. All right, it's a Caps Fan Friday edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this segment here, I have Aaron Freas on the show. Welcome to the show.
How's it going?
It's going great. So as we take a look at the Capitals this past season, they made it to the second round. They made it past the first round for the first time since 2018. Now that we're a bit removed from the season, what were your thoughts on the Capitals this past season?
Going into the season, I had initially hoped that we would win a round in the playoffs. Getting swept by the Rangers last year didn't feel great. That was the hope going in, but after the hot start that we got out to, really even up to the All-Star break, I was kind of expecting a little bit more, but in hindsight, I can't be mad at, where we ended. I thought we could have put up a little bit better of a fight against Carolina personally. I wasn't too mad to see us lose the series, lose in the second round, but, it is what it is.
So as we take a look at the team this summer, July 1st is free agency. You take a look at the roster as is and the restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents. What kind of players do you think the Capitals need to add to this lineup to make them competitive so they can take on the likes of the Carolina Hurricanes?
I thought that especially during the series, I thought you could definitely see us struggling on the power play. I'd be interested to see what you thought. I didn't really think that the two defenseman power play was really working out for us. I know we switched it up and maybe it was the last game or maybe the last two games. I could maybe see, picking up somebody. I think Mangiapane had some, time on the second power play. I think maybe getting some, either different people up on the first power play or cycling out some of the people who may be leaving. I think that would be ideally who we would look for. And then, a lot of people have been talking about Carlson, his abilities, the ice time, it seems like is going to stay for him, but, can he get it done out there? You might want to look at somebody to at least help him out, maybe not replace him entirely, but take some, help away from him. I think that might, benefit us for sure.
Yeah, John Carlson's an interesting player in the regard that there's 1 year left under contract. Chris Patrick, the Capitals, non-committal on his future. Yeah. John Carlson, non-committal about wanting to come back. Do you think the Capitals would be wise considering trading him? I know it's kind of a crazy thought, but if he makes it out past next season and he makes it to free agency, the Capitals get zero for him. If they did trade him, say that they can't come to terms with the deal. What were your thoughts would be on that if the Capitals traded John Carlson, what could possibly be quite a haul?
I could definitely see it benefiting us. I would hate to trade somebody with only the 1 year left on their deal for someone else who we're going to have to try and re-sign. If we did trade him, I would maybe like to see, if not, a decent draft pick. I imagine we'd probably be moving him for a player, but I would hope that player would have a little bit of term left on their deal. But that's not to say that we couldn't try and, pick somebody up and then sign them right away. It's all up to the management, see what they want to do.
Yeah, so some tough questions for the Capitals as we take a look at the line combos. Let's start there from last year. It's pretty solid. I would say the first, second, and fourth line was pretty solid. The big question mark all season long was the third line, and more specifically, the third line center position. There are internal options, Hendrix Lapierre, Connor McMichael. Do you think Chris Patrick should go outside of the organization and just really solidify that position once and for all? Or do you think it would be a safe bet that Lapierre or a Connor McMichael will fit the bill?
I really liked McMichael at center. I know that he had played the last couple games in the playoffs at center. I know we didn't win him, but I did like the way that it looked like he was playing down on the third line at center. But that's not to say, potentially if somebody was on the market that would, serve a little bit better, at least for the short term, I could definitely see it benefiting us. If, up until the trade deadline, McMichael doesn't look like he's quite working out at center with some more extended play time, maybe you make a move then, but I'd at least like to give him the shot. Lapierre, he's been up and down. I think it's worth giving him another shot at the start of the season, but it tapered off pretty quickly last season. I sort of expect to see the same thing.
So let's next switch over to Alex Ovechkin, scoring 897 and catching and passing Gretzky. Another player that has 1 year left under contract. As a fan of the Capitals, do you see him signing an extension, or do you think the Capitals will sign him to an extension? Or what do you think the future is? And what are your thoughts on Ovechkin just having a historic season this past season?
I mean, I'd be lying to you if I didn't see him go down in Utah and really just, it broke my heart. But, seeing him come back, whatever it was, 15, 16, something games like that later, it was crazy to see. I watched every game along the way. It defied expectation for sure. I looked at it going in, seeing that he needed whatever it was, 42 goals. And I thought he'd probably, scrape 30, get close to just above 30 like he did last year. And I figured we'd pick up the last 10 or 15, in his last year. But, him cleaning it up and having this last year to just anything on top of this is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, pretty impressive what he's been able to put up. It's a tough position as he has been a pillar, the captain of this team for so many years, that just to try to envision this team with him not here is kind of hard to think about sometimes. So if we look down the football field a little bit, or the ice rink in this case, that it is going to be Alex Ovechkin, ostensibly being his last year. It could be John Carlson's final year potentially. who are some of the future faces that are going to be the identity of this organization, in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, it's hard not to look at 43. I mean, you've got the jersey behind you. I feel like it's his team, especially after that, the way that he really, I feel like, I don't know if it was just me, but in that game 4, I feel like if he hadn't, almost single-handedly turned that game around himself, the series 2-2 coming back home doesn't feel so good. It really just feels like it is his team. And, you've heard some stuff in the media and things like that over the past couple of years. I think maybe even Ovechkin said that sort of, it's looking like it's going to be Tom Wilson's team. As far as Carlson on the defensive side, if he doesn't decide to stick around, I would like to see, Chychrun sort of follow that mold as being an offensive defenseman, getting a lot of time playing on the power play. Whether they go 1 or 2 defensemen on the power play, I feel like if they do go with one, it would, they got to work it out in training camp, but I feel like it's probably going to end up being him, the sole defenseman on the top power play, if they only end up going with one. So, they just signed him to a big deal. I'd really like to see him, follow in the footsteps of Carlson, if you will.
All right, Aaron, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, how long you've been a Capitals fan, and just let everyone know a little bit about yourself here.
For sure. Growing up in Texas, hockey's not exactly the biggest sport. My dad, the company he worked for, we would get Rampage tickets. I know they're not a team anymore, but we'd go to Rampage games every now and then. I think they were the Blues affiliate for a while and then ended up getting sold. I think they're now Vegas's affiliate. But I didn't really have a tie to a team up until roughly, 16, 17, whenever the Caps really started, unfortunately coming up against some pretty difficult times in the playoffs against the Penguins. It really just sort of galvanized me to want to start watching. My dad's from, Maryland, the DMV, lived around there up until he's 2025. So, he had gone to Capitals games. He has got like a little sort of display thing of the playoff run that they went to in 98. I think he had went to a couple conference finals games with some friends back then. So it was the only connection to a hockey team that I really had in any way. So I picked them. It was a good time to get in. I didn't see quite the amount of playoff sorrow as some Caps fans, but hey, this year wasn't too easy to swallow either, especially with the season we had.
Yeah, hoping for some bigger and better things next season. Listen, Aaron, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.